Welcome back to Sports in the Law, examining the legal evolution of America's three major leagues. Today we're giving you our 2020 updates for the Esports module, which is chapter 4 and 5 of the book. It's actually primarily an article that I was able to write with the help of Aaron Caputo, who's here, and we're going to get to that in our outline. Updates us on esports. We'll have two wonderful guests, Krista Heiner and Hal Biagas, to go through it with us. But before we get to the JCell article, Zach has volunteered to take us through some of the updates. Before we get there, Zach, I would say the class should certainly skim through lays the foundation for esports magnificently. It's quite detailed and quite foundational for those of you who aren't as familiar with esports. So certainly look through that, skim through that YouTube video, and also skim through the JCell article, which Aaron and I will be discussing a little bit, the high points of that as an update to week 4, plan 4. So go ahead, Zach, take us through. Here we are, FaZe Clan, the TFUE lawsuit. Brief background, and
yep.
It led to a settlement. Give us a little bit more detail on this. It's our 2020 update on esports.
Yep. So esports obviously is becoming bigger and bigger, and there's getting more and more money involved. And so Tfue is a streamer with FaZe. Basically, he streams online and he gets donations, he gets sponsorships, and FaZe Clan, they're basically his sponsors. They collect a portion of the money that he makes. So they signed a contract when he was, I believe, around 20 or so. And he was a relatively small streamer back then. And his contract, he claims, was super onerous. It took a lot of his money, it restricted a lot of his ability to get other sponsorships. And so what he did after he has since become a huge star in the esports scene, in the sense that a lot of people are watching him play these games. And now he's suing FaZe, saying that contract just shouldn't have been allowed, that it was unfair, he was young, they're taking too much money. And so this was one of the first cases we ever seen where a sponsor / team and a streamer themselves went to court over this issue. And as we see, sadly, they settled beforehand, so we weren't able to truly get a glimpse of everything within the lawsuit. But it seems that this will be a larger and larger issue moving forward as more of these esports stars get more money and as these contracts come into greater scrutiny.
Great analysis. It really is sort of the uniform player contract that we've been looking at for the first few weeks of the course, and what is that contract going to look like ultimately? These are not unionized groups, at least as of yet. So these are individually negotiated agreements. Are they contracts of adhesion? Are they overreaching? Did an attorney, for example, review Tfue's contract before he signed it? Maybe, maybe not. But even is it still enforceable because it's so one-sided? And what options does somebody like that have to go off on his own, or must he play within a publisher's league to have the kind of monetization opportunity that he should have? NBA 2K League is next. We've got a lot of foundational stuff on that as well from back in 2019, as well as in the article we're going to go through shortly. But take us through what was that season like for NBA 2K and COVID? Zach, let's stay with you.
Yeah, so as we all know, COVID has affected sports a lot, and esports, I think most people assume that, and rightfully so, that it'd be able to bounce back a lot faster than the other sports, and so the NBA 2K League was. They were able to finish their season. I think one possible misconception is a lot of people assume that, the league would these esports leagues would just be able to proceed without any issue whatsoever because they're online, but I think it is important to realize that there are also issues that appear in COVID that affect esports leagues. And NBA 2K was delayed for a couple of weeks, I believe, before they were able to complete in its entirety, but it was still able to proceed forward. So it shows that these esports leagues, they have promise and they are able to move forward even during these incredibly calamitous times. And it's interesting to see that there are also discipline that's involving in these leagues. These leagues are just like the three major ones where there are going to be mess ups from the players, and the league is going to have to make these decisions and create precedent about how these players will be and should be punished.
Absolutely. Player code of conduct detrimental. We've seen that across the three major leagues in the first 3 weeks. Now we're into week 4. But, in terms of violating the coronavirus, the pandemic protocol, return to play protocols, same thing would apply, right? What if some player decided to come play with a teammate and Was he tested positive? After the fact was found to have been positive. I mean, what kinds of recourse would the publisher, the league, have against such a player?
I think it would depend on the league slash publisher and whether or not how active that publisher is. I imagine for the NBA 2K, the NBA is going to play a large role in deciding these punishments, and they're going to be quite proactive with their punishments versus something like League of Legends. Perhaps maybe not the Tencent, who's the owner of League, being the one that puts down the punishment, but perhaps the league that they're in or the individual teams would be more instrumental in handing down the punishment. So I think it depends on the esports title and how much power each publisher slash team slash league has respectively.
And we should clarify, these are unitary. They're sort of like MLS, right, in a way. If we keep analogizing back to the 4 major league, it's not like each team, it's a franchise thing, but it's really controlled by the publisher. Let's just say that each league is controlled by each publisher in effect.
Yes,
right?
So like Tencent, they created League of Legends, so they completely control how that game is played. Down a level, we have each competition, that each league that happens on each continent. So for example, the MLS, there is a North American League of Legends league. So there are different levels to this with the league, the publisher, and the teams.
Yeah, and in terms of negotiating the uniform player contract, let's just stay with that. And these various codes of conduct, violations for same, we have great links for that. Violated the gambling rules. Again, we see this permeating throughout each of the 3 major leagues, and we study those in some great length. But in terms of that, is it the franchisor or the league? It's the same question we asked. Can both the team and the publisher, punish somebody for violating the league's gambling rules? How does that work? We can't have double jeopardy, double penalty.
I imagine it depends on the league. I'm sure with your individual contract that you sign with the team, like perhaps there's punishments there as with the league. I know each league is set up quite differently though, so different ones might allow both, while one might just allow one or the other.
Great. It's the same, all the same issues. That's what thank you so much. And it's all the same issues that we're seeing, this evolution of this brand new league with a unitary system, but all the same issues for the individual players, and they're not unionized yet, so they don't have the advantage of the non-statutory labor exemption, right? So there's still antitrust, restraint of trade issues that are at work. Ryan, do you want to comment before we go into the JSL article? Please add whatever you think the class should know, how this relates back to the evolution of the other major leagues.
Yeah, so as you'll see when you do the readings for class, the current esports landscape is experiencing some of the similar problems that previous sports did. As you alluded to, Professor, they don't have the non-statutory labor exemption anymore, so they're going through those growing pains of sorts, albeit taking the legal and historical lessons from past leagues and trying to learn from them. But player rights aren't as defined, as well as what is the outermost acceptable boundaries for the leagues without violating any trust laws aren't defined either. And until the sport grows to a point where they're unionized and get the benefit of that exemption, this is still not uncharted territory in the legal history, but uncharted territory for them.
You wonder if there couldn't or wouldn't be sort of a perpetual and evergreen reserve clause written into some of these great players' contracts. As things stand now, if they were to take that position, like happened in Flood v. Kuhn, that you're forever a member of this league, let's say of this team, and you signed that reserve clause, arguably you would be bound by that unless you could prove that it was an illegal restraint of trade. You go through the whole analysis. If it passed the rule of reason test, I mean, you'd be back to the pre- and non-statutory labor exemption regime, I assume. I'm asking a leading question, Ryan.
Yeah, so that is likely the outcome because no sport benefits like baseball does from antitrust exemptions. So the esports likely does not have the latitude baseball did, but that would be a decision for the courts to decide.
So again, what we've been teaching throughout, how everything gets determined by a grievance arbitrator across the 3 leagues. Very little you can vacate an arbitration. We have, lots and lots of cases that show final binding arbitration is the end of a dispute. If you go to court, you're only trying to vacate. It's a vacatur option. I want to vacate the arbitration award because, it's out of its mind, so to speak. But here we would be back in court. We'd be evolving through the Lajoie and the Chase and those kinds of cases that we've read about that have now been concretized through the CBAs of the 3 major leagues. Steve Garvey being one of the Supreme Court cases that talks about the finality of final binding arbitration. Okay, thank you, Zach, and thank you, Ryan. And then you were so helpful in helping us get published this wonderful article in JSL last year. And really, we're talking about that next bullet point before we get to streaming and esports and COVID. We're going back up a bullet point to that. Aaron, we've got a great table of contents there. It really rings the changes on each of the three major leagues, what they're trying to do, what they are doing in the esports realm. And I think the even more interesting part is as we really created a new chapter for the book by going through each of the three leagues and seeing how does that uniform player contract, MLB, NFL, NBA, what does that look like in terms of intellectual property rights, in terms of restraint of trade, in terms of injury grievances. And the article itself, I think, is best segmented that way for purposes of reading in advance of week 4, is to look at the analysis of what's still negotiable, what has been negotiated, and what could be challenged legally because we're in a non-statutory labor exemption world. Aaron, go ahead. Why don't you take us through really more the second part of the article that deals with each of these issues. It's complementary to the book.
Yeah, so I think the place to start off is almost like the level of involvement between Major League Baseball, the National Football League, and the NBA in terms of their foray into esports. So Major League Baseball has just started a league that hasn't really got off the ground yet. It's the MLB China Esports League. The NBA or the NFL has the Madden Championship Series, and these two leagues are, I would say, almost vastly different from the NBA in terms of their development because they're newer. They don't have the support behind them that the NBA has behind the NBA 2K League. So in those leagues, there aren't even individual contracts that we would, be able to run through, the chapters of the book like we do with the NBA 2K League. So that's why the second part of the book takes the NBA 2K League as an example and kind of applies it to the chapters of the book and gives it analysis that way. So we can almost set the MLB and the NFL aside because they're not as developed at all to be able to handle any of these questions. So for the NBA, you start with, as we just talked about, commissioner discipline, the NBA 2K League, commissioner discipline. There's Brendan Donahue, who is the commissioner, has the authority to discipline players under the player code of conduct and other policies that they have, like we saw with the gambling policies, etc. So that's where we start there. And then as we go through.
And Aaron, just to interrupt. So essentially what they're doing is mimicking,
right.
what the commissioner of the NBA would be able to do, conduct detrimental, the equivalent of,
right.
Okay. Yeah. And
exactly.
They're mimicking that, but it's separate and apart from, some of these franchises, I don't mean to interrupt, but some of these franchises are owned by
the most NBA of them
team.
Are.
Most of them are, but not all of them are.
Right.
So it's still a totally separate team of people that's running the 2K
correct
team for the most part. The
NBA 2K League it's owned by the NBA, but it's a separate entity in itself.
Right.
And so teams, right, the teams themselves then also, own the teams that the NBA teams own the NBA 2K teams that they're playing with. However, there's a new team actually, I think it's Gen G that came in from Shanghai in this last season. And not all the NBA teams have NBA 2K teams. So there is only, I think, 21 entering this last season. So it is still developing in itself. I don't want to make it seem like it's, comparable to the NBA, the MLB, or the NFL, but is more developed than the other leagues. But so, and they're kind of basing it off of the NBA model because it's owned by the NBA.
Thank you. Keep going. Yeah. And the different headings in the article, you rang the changes on the theme as if it were part of one of the major leagues, but it's different and it's still evolving.
Right. And so, and then I guess the next chapter, if you're going to take this through the book, would be the uniform player contract. And so again, set up very similarly, have a set salary per year, certain benefits that you need to provide. But again, to keep in your mind, none of this has been collectively bargained. None of this has been. It was set forth by the league. They came together and said, "This is what we want. This is how we want to structure the salaries. How we want to structure the benefits and everything else. And this is what it's going to be." So again, that leaves open that possible antitrust lawsuit, whatever you want to, however you want to proceed. But yeah, not collectively bargained at all. And there's plenty of different nuances in there between, the NBA 2K League and other professional sports. So, for example, it's almost like every year is an expansion draft if you were to see that in a professional sport. So, after every year, a team gets the right to retain, I think it's 2 players. And if they don't, the players that they retain stay on their team. The players they don't go back into the draft pool, and then they can draft. They'll have another draft each year where they can draft based on those players or new players coming into the league based on their combine and things like that. So it's similar to other professional sports leagues, but with these nuances because it's just starting out. They want to make sure they have all the best talent in the league, and they're trying to really still figure it out. Is kind of what it seems like.
And who owns what intellectual property, and how much streaming can the player do on his or her own? Is mostly, all that is still, our guests will speak to it, but
Right.
Can you have a competing brand when you're streaming on your own on Twitch, trying to make extra money separate and apart from what you make for the NBA 2K team? I mean, those are the kinds of things that are still evolving.
Right. So, the league intellectual property is all owned by the league. Like if someone to sell a jersey with a player's name on it, then I'm trying to think of some of the silly gamer tags, because all these players are known by their gamer tags, not their actual names. So if you were to have a gamer tag on the back of a jersey or some sort of merchandise with league intellectual property on it, all that money would go to the league. In terms of streaming and conflicting sponsorships, the league has carved out all those categories, for the ones that they have sponsorships and partnerships with for themselves. So players streaming and sponsorships or endorsements via stream can't conflict with those. And Hal, your guest coming up, will be really they'll be primed to speak on this, although it is different in that they have their trade association and they're able to negotiate a little more with Riot and League of Legends, and the NBA 2K players don't really have that luxury. But it's similar in that regard, in that a lot of these categories are carved out by the league, and so players are preempted from, getting endorsement deals or sponsorship deals with a lot of these partners that would be in those categories.
Very, very different, all one-sided. You could call it a contract of adhesion compared to Paxson and Valentine, which challenge the NBA's prevention, of individual players, endorsement agreements and the approvals that have to be obtained now that usually are obtained when players want to do their own endorsement agreements separate and apart from the teams, as long as they don't directly conflict. All that, again, the point is we're making here, all that has now been collectively bargained through the different licensing regimens for the three major leagues. It's still being worked out. It's all one way, and it's all the league's way, the publisher's ways right now.
Right. Exactly. Especially with no collective bargaining unit on the other side, no one to negotiate against them. They're kind of taking as much as they can, and hasn't been any legal challenges yet, but you never know in the future.
Yeah. Okay. Just finish up here. I guess we're back to streaming and esports and COVID a little bit more. Go ahead, Zach. Why don't you take us through some of the links there? They're all footnoted, 12 and 13.
Yep. The big news with regards to streaming was most streaming happens on this website called Twitch, and Microsoft created a new website called Mixer, and what they did was they signed a bunch of exclusive deals with these streamers, often in the millions, where these streamers promised to stream on their websites in exchange for this money. Mixer ended up doing very poorly, and so all of these contracts went under, and so but basically there was a pretty big legal question of like what would happen to these streamers. They had exclusive rights with Mixer. What would happen to them? Would they be let go? Would they be forced to just not stream? And the resolution was they were allowed to they were released from their contracts, and they returned to Twitch, where they're happily streaming now.
Terrific. And we've sort of been over esports and COVID a little bit, but I mean, most of the tournaments went on. I mean, it was some of the only able to be watched live sports, during the worst parts of the pandemic. So many of the leagues went to online format only, though. They had to give up the venues for the most part, which of course is tons of money, just like it's same across all three leagues where no fans are involved or very few fans are allowed to attend. What would you say? That is it fair to say in the last bullet point, of all sports that were affected by COVID, esports was most likely the least affected? We can finish off with that sort of thought piece.
I would think so, because just like we can all imagine, like unlike every other sport, you can play the sport quarantined. You can play it in a room separate from everyone else. And I mean, right now, the League of Legends World Championship is about to start in 2 days in China. And there are no other live sports happening in China. And yet Tencent was able to have this gigantic event where they brought in players from all around the world. They brought in players from America, players from Korea, players from Europe, and quarantined them. and basically said, you will play this entire tournament more or less in quarantine, and they were able to get it done. I can't imagine like any other situation where they'd hold a basketball tournament or something like that. Like we've seen the Olympics were canceled or postponed. So yes, I think that statement seems accurate. More than any other sport, esports was definitely least affected.
The ultimate bubble, I guess you might say.
Yeah, and I
Okay,
think,
go ahead,
sorry, I was
please.
just saying, yeah, I think one thing to mention too is that you look at most sports and you see, you know, NFL, MLB, NBA, not many positives came out of COVID, but I think you can at least try and pull one positive out of COVID for esports, and that for a period of time there, it was isolated as the only sport that was really on TV. That, and then, you know, you see tennis, some of the individual sports, tennis and golf coming in afterwards, but for a while, esports was kind of the only thing there, and it got a lot more vision, a lot more traction on. I think when you see it on major networks like ESPN and things like that, I think
Absolutely.
it did get somewhat of a boost.
Yeah, I was so glad I stopped watching professional cornhole. It's about all that was on early on. Okay, we're going to cut this one off. That's the end of week 4, our esports evolution of that new, almost, I think it's fair to call it a major league sport in the making. And we'll be back to you soon with our updates for the non-statutory labor exemption. Thank you very much.